Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to class. This is your American literature paper, and we've started off with an essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Just to recap on what we did in the last lecture, we started the essay, and amongst all the other things that I told you, I emphasized the fact that Emerson is one of the most important essayists in American literature, and that is one reason why he has been included. His thoughts, his ideas are expressed in language which might seem a little difficult to understand, but as we go along, I'm going to be explaining to you different portions, and I'm sure by the time we come to the end of this essay, you'll be far more comfortable with Emerson's work than ever before. The essay is titled Self-Reliance, and you know that this is the essay in which he is trying to emphasize reliance on one's own abilities, capacities, and how efficiently we can work when we rely on ourselves, our abilities, and not on external forces or external agents. So as we go on with the essay, Emerson is going to be providing you with different examples, different instances of how effectively human beings can work if they depend on no outside agency but their own efforts and their own abilities. So let's see what we have in the PowerPoints today. Remember, this is your ENG553 American literature, and we are starting with Emerson's essay on self-reliance. I also pointed out in the introductory lecture that we're going to be covering as many genres of literature as possible. So we've started off with the essay. We'll be moving on to drama and short stories also, and I also told you that I'm going to try to fit in somewhere Emily Dickinson's poetry, because I don't think this module is going to be complete unless we cover all the known genres. So let's go on with self-reliance and Emerson's ideas on how human beings must depend on their own innate abilities rather than external forces and external agents. A man, he says, should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Now, this is a very important point. In the routine course of events, we human beings, and more specifically we students of literature, have a tendency to depend on the writings of the great masters. When he talks about the firmament of bards and sages, he's referring to the poets and philosophers whose works we as students of literature hold uppermost in our minds when we plan to do something. We always quote poets, we quote philosophers, and we say Socrates said this at a particular instance, this is what Plato advocates, this is what Shakespeare has said. But what Emerson is trying to emphasize here is that we must rely on that gleam of light and be prepared to catch that inspiration when we get it, and not rely on what a particular poet or a philosopher or a wise man has said. So he says that the thoughts that we dismiss casually because they're ours, we need to get ownership of these and not disregard them just because they're ours and not Shakespeare's or Milton's or Aristotle's. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts, they come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression with good-humored inflexibility than most when the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else tomorrow a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have thought and felt all the time, and we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. Okay, let's go back a bit. So he says a man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within. Whenever we have inspiration from within, we need to be watching out for it. We need to take ownership of that gleam of light, of that inspiration, and make sure that we use it to the best of our ability. Not wait for some poet, some philosopher to dictate to us and then work on what we thought all along. So he says that when we read a work produced by genius, we invariably find out that what we rejected as being ours is what is being given to us by another sage, another philosopher. So human beings have a limited repository of thoughts, and again those thoughts, those ideas are recycled, rehashed and presented to us as being new. So when Emerson says that we need to rely on ourselves and our own thoughts, our own inspirations, he is trying to negate the importance of outside influence. So he says that when we read the work of some scientist, let's say, or some philosopher, we say, oh, this is what I thought all along. So why did you not take heed of that thought when you got it? This is what Emerson is trying to emphasize here. He says great works of art have only one lesson for us, and that is that our own spontaneous thoughts, feelings, emotions are what we need to keep in mind. We must not reject our own ideas, because if we do, somebody else will pick up our thought, our idea, present it to us as being something new, and then we shall look foolish accepting ideas from another person which all along we have had. So, reliance on the self. There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself for better, for worse, as his portion, that though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him to till. So Emerson is trying to bring in examples from various fields, various aspects of life. And one example that he brings in here is from the field of agriculture. You know, the kernel is the most important part. The one for which you strive. So if somebody talks about a kernel of knowledge, that is the essence of that idea or that thought or that work. So he brings in this image of kernel, and he says that we will get only that which we work for, which we till, we plant, we water, nourish, and then comes the harvesting. So we harvest only that which we have sown into the ground. If we plant corn, we're going to get corn. We cannot plant wheat and expect to get corn. We have to work at an idea, acknowledge it as our own, make sure that we maintain ownership, work on that idea, and then only will we be able to benefit from it. So he's going to bring in different examples in order to reinforce the idea that we must depend on ourselves, on our work, not on external agents, not on external forces. The power which resides in him is new in nature, and none but he knows what that is which he can do, nor does he know until he has tried. Not for nothing, one face, one character, one fact makes much impression on him, and another none. This sculpture in the memory is not without pre-established harmony. The eye was placed where one ray should fall, that it might testify of that particular ray. So you see how he brings in examples from different aspects of life. Here he brings in the example of one face, one character being more impressive than another. And he says that the power which resides in each one of us is something that we have just discovered. But we do not know what we can do until we set out to do it. Until we try, we do not know what our body is capable of, what our mind is capable of. But if we start depending on external sources, then we never realize the potential of our body and our mind. So one of the examples that he gives is that of the eye. He says the eye is placed so that one ray should fall and the eye can testify to that ray. What he's trying to say is that the physical and mental faculties that each human being is endowed with has been given with a purpose, and the purpose is to utilize it to the best of our abilities. So if we use our eye, then we are fulfilling the purpose for which the eye was placed. If we use our ears, our tongue, our hands, feet, and other parts of our body, that is because this is what the body has been given to us for. In the same way, when we use our mind, we know that we have this ability, and we cannot know until we have tried it. So, students sometimes say, oh, I can't do this subject, I can never learn it. You cannot know whether you can learn it or not unless you've tried. Unless and until you try to learn something, unless and until you attempt to gain that knowledge, you cannot tell, you cannot say for sure whether you have the ability or not. So he's bringing in examples from different aspects of life. We but half express ourselves and are ashamed of that divine idea which each of us represents. Each human being has a divine spirit, has a part of him that is immortal. And that is what we need to use. It may be safely trusted as proportionate and of good issues, so it be faithfully imparted, but God will not have his work made manifest by cowards. So this is where Emerson brings in God, and he says that God has bestowed each one of us with certain abilities, with the capacity to do certain work. We will only know what we can do when we try to do it. If we just sit back with our hands folded and we expect some things to be done for us, they will not be done. We have to get up, do it, and then only will work get done. So God will not have his work made manifest by cowards. God has given us the courage. God has given us the ability to do things. Unless we use that courage and we go ahead and do whatever it is that our body and mind can do, we will not know what we are capable of. A man is relieved and gay when he has put his heart into his work and done his best. That's something that all of you know. When you know you can do something and you put your heart and soul in it, you get very good results. But what he has said or done otherwise shall give him no peace. So when he put his heart and soul into his work, then he gets the rewards. Otherwise, he can go on working till kingdom come, and he will not get that sense of satisfaction that he has completed something, that he has proved himself in many different ways. It is a deliverance which does not deliver. In the attempt, his genius deserts him. No muse befriends, no invention, no hope. So, unless we do our best, unless we put our heart and soul in whatever we are attempting to do, all the genius that we have been blessed with will desert us, will leave us. We will not be able to create anything. We will not be able to hope for anything to happen. So in order to do anything, we have to first attempt it. As they say, no pains, no gains. Unless we attempt it, unless we make a conscious effort, nothing is going to come to us automatically just because we happen to be sitting here. We have to get up and do something. We have to put everything into practice. Trust thyself. This is the gist of what Emerson is trying to say here. Trust thyself. Very important words, students. I want you to remember these words. Trust thyself. Be confident of yourself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. See, it's such a strong idea that he says it is made of iron. Every heart vibrates. When this term, trust thyself, is spoken, each one of us can identify himself or herself with that idea. Accept the place the divine providence has found for you, the society of your contemporaries, the connection of events. Great men have always done so and confided themselves childlike to the genius of their age, betraying their perception that the absolutely trustworthy was seated at their heart, working through their hands, predominating in all their being. And we are now men and must accept in the highest mind the same transcendent destiny, and not minors and individuals in a protected corner, not cowards fleeing before a revolution, but guides, redeemers, and benefactors, obeying the almighty effort and advancing on chaos and the dark. Okay. Now, Emerson says, accept the place the divine providence has found for you. Each one of us has a position in relation to our society, a position in relation to our community. If I'm a teacher, I have a certain position in my community. In my teaching community, I have a certain position as a wife, as a mother, as a homemaker, as a daughter. I have a position in a family group. So each one of us have been placed according to divine providence. And this is what we have to focus on. Whenever we have an idea, we have to take ownership, we have to acknowledge that it is ours, and then only can we put that idea into practical shape. We are now men and must accept in the highest mind the same transcendent destiny. So we are what? The crown of creation, Ashraf al-Makhluqat. So as the crown of creation, as the most evolved of all species, we are guides, redeemers, and benefactors because we obey the Almighty. And in our battle against chaos and the dark, we bring intelligence and knowledge. The light of intelligence and knowledge will dispel, will do away with confusion and the darkness of the night, which is what ignorance amounts to. When we place ignorance and intelligence, or ignorance and knowledge side by side, ignorance is chaos, confusion. Knowledge, intelligence is light, is clarity. So we must use the knowledge and the intelligence that has been given to us by the Almighty in order to completely destroy the chaos and the dark, the confusion and the ignorance. What pretty oracles nature yields us on this text in the face and behavior of children, babes, and even brutes. You know, there's a saying, out of the mouths of babes and sucklings. Even little children, newborn babies sometimes give you great ideas. So he says that nature has provided to us many different ways, many different aspects from which we can view life. And we need to be very clear in our mind that divided and rebel mind, that distrust of a sentiment because our arithmetic has computed the strength and means opposed to our purpose, these have not. So children, babies, and animals, these three categories, Emerson says, are devoid of all distrust. They're very trusting. They believe very easily. Their mind being whole, their eye is yet unconquered, and we look in their faces, we are disconcerted. You know, when you look at a child's face, you are taken in by the absolute innocence that the face shows. Infancy conforms to nobody, all conform to it. So that one babe, and this is a very interesting example, one babe commonly makes 4 or 5 out of the adults who prattle and play to it. Have you ever seen a baby and how the baby behaves in front of adults, and how adults in turn behave in front of the baby? Now, the baby cannot imitate the adult the way the adult will imitate the baby. Have you ever seen babies when they start talking, for example, when they get speech, they'll go baba, dada, mama. And what do the adults do? Now the adults have speech. They are intelligent. But what they start doing is, when they're sitting in front of the baby, they'll go baba, and the baby will say baba. Then the adult will say dada, and the baby will say dada. So the baby has no other choice. The adult has a choice, and yet prefers to talk like the baby, so that all the speech, all the ideas that the adult has are reduced to these monosyllabic words: baba, dada, mama. That's it. That's all their speech consists of. So what Emerson is trying to say here is that small babies can make fools out of grown-ups by sticking to what they can say. They don't have a choice. You know, those are the only vocabulary items they have. But adults who have the whole vocabulary of a language discard everything else, and their language is reduced to conforming to the baby. So that's something that Emerson says is really very strange, because you would expect babies to learn from adults. Here it's the other way around. The baby is the teacher. Out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, you and all adults are following that baby. And if the baby starts to get up and try to walk a little, you'll see adults walking behind the baby in the same way. They will not walk straight. And how many times do you see grown-ups, parents, grandparents, bending down on the floor on all fours and walking or crawling like the baby is doing? The baby has no choice. The baby is crawling because it cannot stand up and walk. The adult can. And yet when they see the baby, that's what they start doing. So it's a regression. God has armed youth and puberty and manhood no less with its own piquancy and charm, and made it enviable and gracious, as claims not to be put by if it will stand by itself. If it will stand by itself. Do not think the youth has no force because he cannot speak to you and me. Hark! In the next room his voice is sufficiently clear and emphatic. It seems he knows how to speak to his contemporaries. Bashful or bold, then, he will know how to make us seniors very unnecessary. The nonchalance of boys who are sure of a dinner and would disdain as much as a lord to do or say aught to conciliate one is the healthy attitude of human nature. A boy is in the parlor what the pit is in the playhouse. Independent, irresponsible, looking out from his corner on such people and facts as pass by, he tries and sentences them on their merits in the swift, summary way of boys, as good, bad, interesting, silly, eloquent, troublesome. Okay, let's go back a bit. So God has armed youth and puberty and manhood. God has given to each stage of human beings its own charm, its own strength and weaknesses. And what Emerson is trying to say here is that we must put those strengths to use. We must make sure that we utilize all the faculties that our youth is possessed of. Now, one point that Emerson makes here is that young boys particularly do not speak in the company of their seniors. You will have seen very frequently that children, young boys and girls, are what you call shy. And when you have strangers coming into the house, they'll just sit there on a chair, not talk to anyone, maybe bite their nails, maybe just, look down, maybe look at the corner, not look at the guests, and they will not talk to them. But Emerson's point of view is that that does not mean that they cannot talk. They can talk, because the moment they go out of the room and they have friends sitting in that next room, you should hear the noise. And it is said that young boys and girls who are absolutely silent in the company of their elders are the most talkative when they are with their own contemporaries. So that's what Emerson is trying to emphasize here. And he says that we who are looking at ideas coming from a poet who died, let's say, 300 years ago, or a philosopher who died 15 centuries ago, we need to realize that young people can give us more ideas, deeper ideas than those philosophers and sages and wise men who died hundreds of years ago. And one sentence he uses here, a boy is in the parlor, what the pit is in the playhouse. You know what the pit is? In a Shakespearean theatre, you had audience sitting on the sides in the gallery, and they were looking down on the stage. And then you had people who bought the cheapest tickets, and they got to sit on the floor of the pit. And this pit was the area that was right next to the stage. You didn't have any chairs, any seats there. So people either had to sit on the ground or they just had to stand there. So he says that the boy is in the parlor, what the pit is in the playhouse. The audience in the pit, or what were called the groundlings, are a very, very important part of the playhouse, of the theatre, because they manage to communicate directly with the players because they are so close. People who sit in the galleries cannot communicate with the players, but in a Shakespearean theatre, the groundlings or the people in the pit are right next to the stage. So when something happens on the stage that they don't like, these people will start hooting, will start booing those actors. And you know, in the Shakespearean theatre, very frequently there was communication between the people on the stage, that is the actors, and those who were in the pits. Because if the people in the pits or the groundlings did not like what was being presented on the stage, they would start hooting. And then a player would come from the stage and say, "What are you doing?" And the people would say, "We are getting bored, we want something else, we want some action." And sometimes there would be a fight breaking out because the ideas of the actors differed from those of the groundlings. So a boy in the parlor, you must have young people, you must have their ideas being presented and being given importance, because their point of view is very clear. They have a perspective that allows them to see from up front, that gives them a very clear view, a very clear image of what is being presented on the stage. So a boy is in the parlor, what the pit is in the playhouse. The people sitting in the pits, you know, most of the time decided the fate of the play. If they didn't like a play, they would hoot at the players. The players would have to stop acting. They would have to stop the play being presented because the people in the pits did not like it. So they had a very significant role to play. He cumbers himself never about consequences, about interests. He gives an independent, genuine verdict. So a young boy, a young man will not be biased, will have very clear ideas, will have very clear concepts, and if you ask for his opinion, he'll give you his opinion without showing the least bias, without showing that he or she is influenced. You must quote him. He does not quote you. You have to please the young boy or the babe or the child. He's not going to please you. But the man is, as it were, clapped into jail by his consciousness. As soon as he has spoken or acted, we declare he is a committed person, washed by the sympathy or the hatred of hundreds, whose affections must now enter into his account. So grown men are restricted, are hindered by their ideas, by their fears of what the consequences may be. And for these fears, there is no lethe, there is no river into which they can step, to which they can wash or bathe, and that will erase all memory. You know, lethe is the river in the underworld, and it is believed that if you step into this river, all thoughts about your past are forgotten. So a complete erasure of your memory. He would utter opinions on all passing affairs which, being seen to be not private but necessary, would sink like darts into the ear of men and put them in fear. So young people are not afraid of anyone. They are not scared to put their ideas into words, and that's the kind of people Emerson says that we need to surround ourselves with. Not people who say yes sir and yes madam and then go and stab you in the back, because these people are direct. These people are shy in front of company, but left to their own contemporaries, they sort of bloom overnight and they come up with all kinds of wonderful ideas. These are the voices which we hear in solitude, but they grow faint and inaudible as we enter into the world. Society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. Society is a joint stock company in which the members agree for the better securing of his bread to each shareholder to surrender the liberty and culture of the eater. The virtue in most request is conformity. Self-reliance is its aversion. It loves not realities and creators, but names and customs. So this is where Emerson brings in self-reliance, and he says society everywhere conspires against the manhood of each of its members. The way that it is done is that a kind of system is set up, and in that system certain people have rights, others have responsibilities, yet others have duties. So he says society is a joint stock company. Society is a company in which all of us have a share. It's a joint stock company. And in this company, members have to agree on everything. Whenever a motion is passed or a bill is presented, society needs to come together to see whether this bill should be passed or not. So what they do is that they gather together in one place, and because their interests are shared, so they conform to the established order. They are not willing to question the decisions and judgment of their elders, their seniors. What they are concerned with is how far can they get the maximum with the minimum amount of effort. So as he says, that society works for the better security of an individual to each shareholder. So society will only look out for its own, and it needs to get ownership. Self-reliance is its aversion. Self-reliance, as the word proclaims, means that you rely on yourself, not on the ideas of others, not on getting help from other people, but relying on yourself, depending on no one but yourself. So he says we need to get out of this sort of vicious circle of societal pressures. Society does not love reality or the creator, but it loves names and customs. You know, your society dictates, I think, about 98% of your behavior and your speech. So whatever society you are put in, you start adopting the speech and the manners of that society. Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. He who would gather immortal palms must not be hindered by the name of goodness, but must explore if it be goodness. Nothing is at last secured but the integrity of your own mind. Absolve you to yourself, and you shall have the suffrage of the world. So, if you want to be a man, a manly man, then you must not conform, because conforming is for the weak, conforming is for the cowards. You must strike out a path for yourself whereby you can make a name for yourself. He says, nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. If your mind maintains its integrity, then nothing and nobody can harm you. I remember an answer when quite young I was prompted to make to a valued advisor who was wont to importune me with the dear old doctrines of the church. On my saying, and these are questions that Emerson is raising to the church, what have I to do with the sacredness of traditions? If I live wholly from within, my friend suggested, but those impulses may be from below, not from above. And I replied, they do not seem to me to be such. But if I am the devil's child, I will live then from the devil. No law can be sacred to me but that of my nature. So what he's, in order to summarize what Emerson has said, he goes back to his past and he thinks about what a young man told him once. And the discussion that was going on was regarding religion, established religion, and the church. And when Emerson said that he had nothing to do with the sanctity of the church, that he was not responsible for it, his friend suggested that these inspirations do not always come from heavens. They may be from below, they may be coming from hell, they may be coming from earth. So when Emerson is questioned on his religious beliefs, his only response is that he needs to be aware of the direction from which these blessings are coming. So if I live wholly from within, he says, if I'm not communicating with anyone, what difference does it make to me how many awards are given to me, or how much praises are sung of me every single day? To me, these things do not matter. But if I am the devil's child, I will outlive them. And he says, in fact, I will outlive even the devil, because the devil's child is going to go on to a longer time than the devil himself. And he sort of puts the lid on it by saying, no law can be secured to me but that of my nature. So whatever my nature dictates, I will do, and all the rest I shall discard. Good and bad are but names, very readily transferable to that or this. You know, my good may not be your good at all. Your bad may be my good. So it works both ways. These are words that can be that can be interchanged. That that do not suit in that place. So the only right is what is after my constitution, the only wrong what is against it. Now this is going to take a little thinking. He's talking about good and bad. We say so, such and such is a good plan, such and such a plan is a bad plan, so and so is a good man, so and so is a bad man. So he says that the only thing I have to say is that these are words that we are very much in the habit of assigning to books, to men and women, most of all to ourselves. We cannot hide from ourselves. We can hide from the rest of the world, but himself, he has to make sure that he sticks to his word, that he does not change his mind very frequently. I'm ashamed to think how easily we capitulate to bags and names, to large societies and dead institutions. Very true. We have a tendency to associate ourselves with what he calls large societies, badges, names, and dead institutions. We like to say, oh, we belong to such and such a place. What do you belong to now is the essential question. As he says, I'm ashamed to think how easily we accept badges and names. If someone says, you know, this letter is coming from the Society of English Language Teachers of Pakistan, I'll say, fine, give it to me, I'll sign it. But if you come in and say, madam, I want you to sign this paper, I'll say, no, why should I? Leave it here, I'll go through it, and then I'll see if I want to sign it. So that is the difference between large societies and what he calls dead institutions. We are more keen to pay heed to what has been said by people in the past, but we do not want to know or to see what is happening in the present. And that's what Emerson is trying to emphasize all along in this essay. Concern should not be with dead institutions. By dead institutions he means the past actually, but they must be with the living, with the present. Every decent and well-spoken individual affects and sways me more than is right. I ought to go upright and right and vital, and speak the rude truth in all ways. If malice and vanity were the coat of philanthropy, shall that pass? If an angry bigot assumes this bountiful cause of abolition and comes to me with his latest news from Barbados, why should I not say to him? So, let's go back a bit. He says, if malice and vanity wear the bag or the coat of philanthropy, shall that pass? If malice and vanity are disguised under philanthropy, you know what philanthropy is? Giving money to charities, giving money to the poor people. So if malice and vanity look like philanthropy, then you need to be very critical of this whole thing. If an angry bigot assumes this bountiful cause of abolition and comes to me with his latest news from from Barbados, why should I not say to him, go love thy infant, love thy woodchopper, the good-natured and modest, have that grace, and never varnish your hand, and never varnish your hard, uncharitable ambition with this incredible tenderness for black folk 1,000 miles off. So, he says, if malice and vanity wear the coat of philanthropy, shall that pass? We must not allow malice and vanity to assume the guise of philanthropy, to assume the guise of charity, and let that pass. Emerson says, if an angry bigot assumes the cause of abolition, you know, the abolition of slavery is a very important issue in American history and particularly in American literature. And President Abraham Lincoln's move to abolish slavery was not only welcomed, but it was also criticized by a lot of people. So what Emerson is trying to say here is that if you have a man who's totally bigoted, and all of a sudden he says, oh, black, red, white, yellow, they're all human beings, and we must not have slavery, and we must have equality, you will know that such and such a bigot is impressed by news which is coming from thousands of miles away. So what Emerson is trying to say here is that we have to look at ourselves, at our own situation, not at what the rest of the world is doing. We must put our own house in order first. Then only can we turn our eyes towards a place like, let's say, Barbados, and say, oh, you know, in Barbados there's slavery and the people are getting killed and people are getting hurt. So Emerson's point of view is that we must stick to what we know, what we have a duty to, what we are responsible for, and not go looking for trouble in other parts of the world. So he says, if somebody like that comes up to me, why should I not say to him, go love thy infant, love thy woodchopper, be good-natured and modest, have that grace, and never varnish your hard and charitable ambition with this incredible tenderness for black folk 1,000 miles off. So he says, if you want charity, do charity in your own community. Be charitable to your own child. Be charitable and generous to those who work in your tiny community. Don't think about what is happening thousands of miles away. You need to set your own house in order before you go looking for something that is being done thousands of miles away. You need to set your own house in order first. Thy love afar is spite at home. Very, very significant line. Thy love afar is spite at home. If you show love for people 1,000 miles away, what you are actually doing is showing your hatred, showing your detestation of people at home. It's people at home who need your love, your kindness, your generosity, your charity, not people sitting thousands of miles away. So rough and graceless would be such greeting, but truth is handsomer than the affectation of love. Your goodness must have some edge to it, else it is none. Emerson has this way of putting his ideas across, and he says that if you show love for people who are sitting thousands of miles away and you're not concerned with people in your own house, then that does not show love for humanity. It shows detestation, hatred for those who are close to you. Let me give you an example here. We're all living in the age of social media. And what I'm going to try to do is to connect Emerson to what is going on in our society these days. All those young men and women, and you are included in that group, you have access to social media. So you know what is happening across the world, in America, in Australia, in the African continent. But are you aware of what is happening in your own locality? Are you aware of what people in your own household are going through? This is something that I have noticed. Young people are sitting in company, maybe inside the house, and what are they busy doing? You think that they are busy talking to their parents and their siblings? No, they have these cell phones and they are texting all the time. Texting to people who are far away, but not communicating with those with whom they live, with whom they spend their lives. So you may not know what your sibling, your brother, sister, your parent, your uncle, aunt is experiencing, but you do know what the friend of your friend of your friend is doing 500 miles away. So what Emerson is trying to say here is that we need to focus on ourselves, our communities. Instead of relying on outside agents, instead of being bothered about outside agencies, we need to draw attention to what is close to our home, to something that concerns us here in our own households, not what is happening thousands of miles away. And when you do that, he says, your goodness will have an edge. What you do will be very important then. Do not try to minimize its importance. It's going to be very, very important. But you need to focus on yourself, your household, your family, your community before you go and spend all your energies and all your intelligence on something that's happening thousands of miles away. Okay? Now we're going to do so far today, but I just want to recap quickly what we have done in our lecture today in these slides that I have shown you. We started off with Emerson's essay on self-reliance, and this is an essay that draws the attention of all people towards the abilities that men and women possess. And Emerson's focus in this essay is on relying on the self, on the individual, rather than on external forces, rather than on outside agencies. So when I started off the lecture today, I told you that Emerson gives examples from different fields of life, and one of the examples that he brings in is that of a small baby. And he says that the baby does not adopt the manners and attitudes of an adult. Instead, exactly the opposite happens. And if you see a baby, you'll see not just one baby, you'll see 4 or 5 babies, one of whom will actually be small in age, the other will be grown-ups, adults, who try to communicate with the baby through the baby's language, through the baby's gestures. So instead of adopting their own manners, their own attitudes and habits, they conform to what the baby is doing. And what Emerson says is that human beings have a choice. The baby has no choice. Yet you see here that the baby does not conform to the adults conform to babies. And one of the examples that Emerson has given us here is that of young men who appear to be very shy, and we think that they are reserved or that they do not have any ideas. But when we let them go to another room where they have their contemporaries or their friends and not us boring adults, you will see that the young boy or young man will start speaking and will present his ideas in a wonderful way. So the problem is that we are not willing to accept that these young men, these young boys, are saying something that is important. We are still willing to believe in what those dead and gone philosophers and poets and sages have passed on down to us, but we are not willing to give credit to what a young boy or young man is saying to us. And in having this viewpoint, we don't realize that it is our youth that we must depend on, that we must not live in the past and bring the elders' works back to us. We must create new work. We must rely on ourselves and not be impressed by people who are dead and gone, people like Greek philosophers, like English poets and dramatists. One name that comes to mind is that of Shakespeare. So instead of quoting the works of those people, we must quote what our young generation is thinking. So giving different examples, Emerson brings us to the point where he says that I do not believe that people who show concern about someone sitting thousands of miles away in another continent are more important than those people who live either inside your household or are a part of that community. We have a tendency to be more concerned about people living on the other side of the world than we are about people living in our own family or in our own city. And so Emerson says, go love thy infant, love thy wood chopper, be good-natured and modest. So he says that if you want to show that you love humanity, don't be worried about people living thousands of miles away. Somebody will be worrying about them. You need to focus on what is closer home, and that is the young people, the young boys, the young men around you. Talk to them. Let them know that their viewpoints are not only interesting, but they are important also. You must make sure that you show love and affection and you give attention to people who are either inside your household or in your immediate vicinity, because when you show love for something that's happening on the other side of the world, you are not showing love for them. What you are showing is hatred for your own people here. And that's something that you have to guard against. Rough and graceless would be such greeting, but truth is handsomer than the affectation of love. So Emerson says that although some people might be offended by your speech and say, oh, you know, he's not talking about abolition, or he's not talking about what is happening in Barbados, so he doesn't know anything. He says you have to disregard those statements and focus on what you can learn from the young generation, and how far you can actually depend on yourself, not on external forces, not on someone coming from another part of the world altogether. This is enough for today. We'll do some more in the next class. Thank you for being such patient listeners, and Allah Hafiz.